Welcome to the June 4th, 2024 Committee on Special Population meeting. And I'm going to, today we are going to discuss important topic about inclusion in our schools. It is a complex concept that challenges school system to ensure that our students are in the least restricted environment. What does that mean? How does it work? What do we do when a placement is not working? How do we know it's not working? And for whom is it not working? How are we preparing all students to thrive in their future? So there are a lot of complex issues to discuss. Before I go on, I would like to do a round of introduction. I'm Julie Yang, the chair of the committee, and I'm going to go to my right.
Good morning, buenos dias. Grace Rivera Oben, and I represent District 1. Nice to see everyone here today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Harris. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an at-large member of the board, and happy Pride Month, everybody.
So we also have a lot of staff members join us today. Good morning to you all. I'm going to do a round of have you introduce yourself. We will start with the board staff.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lori Christina Webb. I'm the Chief of Staff for the board.
Good morning. Juan Ramos, Administrative Services Manager for the board.
Then we'll go to the presenters table, starting with Mr. Choi.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Troy Body, co-manager of the Rose Grant.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Inger Swimson, and I co-manage the Rose Grant with Dr. Body.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Peggy Pugh. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Montgomery County Public Schools.
Hi, good morning. Brent Mascott, Principal at Weller Road. Glad to be here.
Good morning. Kia Middleton Murphy. I'm the Director, Department of Special Education Services in the Office of Special Education.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know in the audience that we have some other staff. We might have opportunities to bring them to the front, to the table. All right, before we dive into today's discussion, I want to ask my colleagues, are there any comments or questions or concerns for our March 4 meeting informational summary? All right, so then if there's no concern, we'll keep on moving. When we're looking, so I'm going to turn it over to the table to Dr. Choi to start the presentation.
Actually, I'll start. Sorry
I'll
about
turn
that.
it to Dr. Pugh for the presentation.
Thank you. So today we are going to be speaking to you very specifically about a grant called the Rose Grant, which stands for Reducing Over-Identification in Special Education. And it's a really important topic. I've seen each of you demonstrate your passion for these students and your support for providing the services that our students need, particularly those who have unique sets of needs. So today we're going to spend our time discussing two key aspects of the work in the Office of Special Education, and that would be the Rose Grant, Reducing Over-Identification of Special Education Students, and inclusive practices in special education. As Ms. Yang shared at the beginning, showing the inclusive practices in our general education classes is very challenging. It is complex, and it is something that we need to continue to work on getting better at. There will be time for discussion after each of those two main sections of the presentation so that we can engage in a deeper conversation. Next slide, please. This discussion is directly aligned to the board's strategic priority of academic excellence, specifically in improving math and literacy rates, and then for all students, regardless of their students' race, ethnicity, or culture, their English language proficiency and or the disability or impact of a disability. And we provide the structures and supports for improved outcomes for students receiving special education students. And particularly today, we're talking about those students who are dually identified as emergent multilingual learners. Next slide, please. The Rose Grant and inclusive practices in special education are also directly rooted in the district's anti-racist audit domains of school culture and pre-K-12 curriculum, as well as the community relations and engagement, and finally, equity of access. Each of those things that we've learned from our community will be addressed through this work that we're engaging in. Next slide, please. So it's important to know that there is an additional layer of accountability in the area of special education. And next slide, please. And this is something that doesn't directly impact or isn't directly reported for each individual school. It's a report that we get and an accountability system that all districts in the state of Maryland are held accountable to. And that is the Maryland MSDE, Maryland State Department of Education, State Performance Plan Indicators. And I think in reviewing it, there are about 97 indicators. So each indicator that we're supposed to be accountable for and that we report every year to the state is then also disaggregated for each of the subgroups that we have, which is a large set of data to look at. So our discussion today is directly aligned with both the accountability measure and in that report that we receive each year. Specifically, 5A and 5B that you see listed here. And this is what Ms. Yang spoke of at the very beginning about having in the 5A, the students age 6 through 21, whose least restrictive environment is 80% of the day in general education. And then additionally, 5B is the inclusion of students receiving special education, which will be discussed in the inclusive practices section of our meeting. And then number 10, which is over-identification of students with a particular disability, which will be addressed through the Rose Grant section of the meeting. Next slide, please. So while there's a lot of text here, there are key messages that are outlined on this slide that can be referenced later, but that will make the difference for our students receiving special education services in Montgomery County Public Schools. It is really, really important that we examine our processes, both for initial evaluation and then for reevaluation for students who speak languages of other than English. And we know that professional learning, coaching, and monitoring of this process is important so that we can continue to make sure that we are not over-identifying students in special education who may have an English language proficiency need, but doesn't necessarily indicate that they do need special education services. We also know that the collaborative planning and the practices of planning for those students that are in every classroom and observations about the instructional delivery is critical to make sure that our students can be served in the classroom with their peers and that they can gain access to the grade level standards, which will help them accelerate their learning with the appropriate modifications. And then finally, addressing these inequities is not an overnight trip. This is intentional, ongoing collaboration that needs to occur between all offices and all schools as we intentionally plan and re-envision what special education services look like. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to, everybody's already introduced themselves, so I was going to introduce, but I'll turn it over to Drs. Inger Swimson and Troy Body to begin the discussion on specifically on the Rose Grant.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Pugh. Good morning again, Ms. Yang, Ms. Harris, Ms. Rivera-Oven, and Ms. Webb. Again, my name is Inger Swimson. I'm here with my co-partner, Dr. Troy Body, and we are co-managing the Rose Grant. As mentioned earlier, I'm sorry, next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, the Rose Grant is reducing the over-identification in special education. It's a grant program that actually awarded 3 local education agencies, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Calvert County. It's a highly competitive grant to directly address disproportionate identification of certain student subgroups in special education populations. The grants were awarded for work that includes special education populations, over-identification of historically underserved students with intellectual or emotional disabilities. That also includes African American students, emergent multilingual learners, and those who are economically disadvantaged. The Office of Special Education has worked with staff members across different offices, actually multiple MCPS offices, to really look at how we develop a comprehensive evidence-based, and sustainable grant program that's going to be able to address the over-identification of Hispanic Latino students as having an intellectual disability. Our grant runs through September 30th of 2025. Next slide, please. As you know, in MCPS, we educate over 160,000 students in our 211 schools, and they represent a large range racially, ethnically, and receive a large range of services. Next slide, please. And when you're looking at this chart, the data here represents students who are identified with intellectual disabilities by race and ethnicity. The percentage of students identified with an intellectual disability that shows disproportionality include Black or African American students at about 38% and Hispanic Latino students at about 43%. When compared to their Asian, white, and multiple race counterparts, we notice that the identification of Black and Latino students is significantly higher. Next slide, please. And on this slide, we see the initial identification of EML students with intellectual disabilities. In the previous slide, you saw that 43% of the students that identify as Hispanic Latino are initially identified as students with intellectual disabilities. But when we analyze this data further, we see that those initially identified, almost 68%, are dually coded emerging multilingual students with an intellectual disability. This data identifies what our charge is. We have to reduce the over-identification of Hispanic Latino students with intellectual disabilities. Now, we know that this is a small sample size of identified students, and it only provides a snapshot, but it helps us identify opportunities to improve our support of EML students and their families throughout MCPS. Next slide, please. So the Center for Applied Linguistics report, the CAL report, we recognize that there are some concerns from board members on what was reported in this report from 2021. And we're going to report on some of the data points as they relate to EMLs and students receiving special education services, as the recommendations are consistent with those areas of need in MCPS. Some of the key findings from the report identified concerns in the areas of over-identification, variability, and professional learning. The report also showed us that EML students, particularly Hispanic Latino students, are over-identified as students with intellectual disability. In the area of variability, the CAL report uncovered two major misconceptions about EML students with disabilities, and that pertains to identification and evaluation of these students. So just to highlight some educators expressed the mistaken belief that EML should not be evaluated until after they've been in the country for 2 years. Other educators expressed the mistaken belief that special education services trump English language development service, and expressed a concern that English language development services are dropped once a child is diagnosed with a disability. Also, the CAL report reviewers were not able to identify documented evaluation guidelines for EML students, and were also not able to identify clear guidelines from MCPS on best or expected practices on how we engage in outreach to parents of EML students. Interviews from the staff indicated that there's a lot of variability among schools in how they evaluate and how they place and how they serve EML students with disabilities. Lastly, in the area of professional learning, as general education teachers, are typically not well versed on pedagogical knowledge on how to best support EML and ELD students, because most educator preparation programs only touch on special education versus special education combined with emergent multilingual learners. And there, we recognize that there is a difference between language acquisition and intellectual disabilities. So our goal here is to help current MCPS educators, as well as those who are going to be new to MCPS, understand the difference between language development and a disability. There's some additional findings from the Cal Report research study that identified another need in the area of communication with the families of EML students. There was compelling evidence that there are challenges when it comes to communicating with parents, with families of EML students, with caregivers of EML students, with disabilities, especially when in need of translation services. So as a result, the recommendations include the development of clear guidelines for the evaluation and placement of EMLs with disabilities, also making sure that we hold schools accountable for implementing best practices, ensuring that we provide extensive professional learning opportunities to all MCPS staff, and also ensuring that we have a pool of well-trained and well-paid interpreters to support these efforts. I will now turn this over to Dr. Body.
So good morning again. Next slide. A little rusty. So as a result of this examination, extensive examination of data and data analysis, and the recommendations from the Cal report, and the alignment with the MCPS goals to reduce the percentage of Hispanic Latino EML students being initially identified with a disability, MCPS, we have decided that we were going to frame our work in the Rose Grant around 3 areas: assessment, identification, and instruction. Next slide. So when we look at assessment, we want to provide professional learning around how we have been assessing EML students. The initial work began with the training of 30 interpreters from Montgomery County in collaboration with the University of Georgia, where they took a course that was designed for interpreters who participate in special education meetings in K through 12 settings. As we know, it is vitally important at EMT and IEP meetings that parents have a full understanding of the conversations and concerns about their child. So looking at interpreters, it's more than being able to speak a language to a family, but it's also understanding the context and the vocabulary and the framing that happens in these meetings so parents can make the best decisions they can for their child with clarity and precision, thanks to the interpreters. So this course prepares interpreters to navigate the complexities of these meetings, the regulations, the cultural issues involved, and how schools deliver services so that they can communicate with more clarity to parents, again, so they can make the best possible decision for their child. We intend to have 2 more cohorts during the length of the grant. We had an interest meeting for the next cohort 2 weeks ago, and it was really a delight to hear the future participants express how valued they felt and how excited they were about this experience. And feedback from the first cohort indicates that overwhelmingly they got a lot out of it, and they feel that this is going to help improve their skills in EMT and IEP meetings. So this summer, professional learning will continue with a focus on school psychologists and speech language pathologists who will be working with one of our consultants, Dr. Samuel Ortiz, and they'll engage in learning using current research on the relationship between language, cognitive, and academic development, and how it can be used to guide pre- and post-referral with EML students. In addition, participants will be introduced on how and learn how to use the Ortiz Picture Vocabulary Acquisition Test, or PVAT. This assessment is really unique in that it was created by Dr. Ortiz, and it's the first assessment for receptive vocabulary assessment that can be used to fairly and accurately assess both English speakers and English learners. So it's duly normed. So it's normed with as English speakers norms, as well as students who are learning a new language, a second language, to control for exposure to English. The PVAT makes it possible to evaluate an individual from any language background to determine whether that individual's English vocabulary performance follows expected patterns as a native English speaker or as an English learner. So it can indicate whether it's developmental, oral language development, and the student is performing in that realm, or that there's some other challenge going on with the child. So it will actually have a great impact on being able to identify accurately whether or not it's the student's language, or there are other things that we need to look into. Next slide. The next lens that we're going to look through this work from is that through identification. Again, we know that students, EML students in particular, are over-identified because of language, possibly. Sometimes it's bias. Sometimes it's lack of culturally responsive practices in the classroom. There's sometimes challenges around other environmental factors that go into place. And all these things kind of come together to create the potential of kids, EML students, being over-identified. So we need to provide educators with learning on how to meet the needs of EML students and how language development should not be confused with a language disability. This act alone will create better learning outcomes for students who have historically been underserved. So they'll receive training in these areas to, again, boost their ability to better support EML students. So we believe that with coherent implementation of evidence-based strategies, these will have a positive impact on decreasing the percentage of Hispanic Latino EML students being identified with intellectual disabilities. In addition, this work directly aligns with the ongoing work across the district to enhance parent communication. So again, we're training interpreters. We're then working with speech pathologists and school psychologists, which will help to better be able to convey this important message to families. In addition to working with other members of the team, such as administrators, staff development teachers, special educators, English language development teachers, and other staff who are involved in making decisions about a child, the support that a child needs, and in implementing Tier 2 and 3 interventions. Next slide. So instruction is the foundation of all that we do. And it's central to supporting EML students. They need good first instruction that is connected to how language is learned and that is culturally responsive to their needs. As educators, we have to be continuous learners. So we're creating opportunities for staff to do just that. As Dr. Swinson said earlier, oftentimes, preparation programs do not prepare teachers to teach EML students and to tease out whether it's developmental in terms of learning a language or if there's other challenges. So I remember as a first-year teacher, thank goodness, when I was taught first grade, 95% of my students were EML students. I was not prepared. One day I cried because I'm like, I don't know if I'm really reaching them. But fate came into play, and right next door to my classroom was the ESOL office. And I befriended quickly these educators who really helped me to learn all that I know about teaching EML students to great success later. We want to provide more teachers in this system that opportunity to learn the knowledge and skills surrounded around language development, so that, and the skills and knowledge and pedagogy involved, so that we can better serve this particular group of students. So the Rose Grant will align its instructional focus with the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs, the Department of English Learner and Multilingual Education, the Office of School Support and Wellbeing, to create conditions necessary so that every student can experience the academic excellence we want them to have by focusing in on learning, accountability, and results that will engage in cross-office collaboration and elevating this knowledge and skills. Next slide. So, over the next year, funding from the Rose Grant will be used to build capacity of staff through professional learning with various stakeholders within MCPS, higher education partners such as University of Georgia and Towson, and partnering with professional consultants. We're working with Kelly Ryder from the English Language Portal, Dr. Samuel Ortiz, who I mentioned earlier, who has the PVAT assessment, which I think will help change the game, and the English Learner Leadership Advocacy Support Consulting Group, led by Dr. Alba Ortiz and Linda Cavazos. So currently, we are working with our university partners to create additional opportunities for educators. During the summer, we'll continue professional learning with staff new to MCPS at NEO, with Dr. Ortiz, who again will focus in on language acquisition, equitable pre-referral practices, the relationship between language development, cognitive and academic development. This work will continue in the fall as we work with selected schools to enhance their school improvement plans with a focus on EML students. Our consultants will coach, provide professional development and feedback, and help to design a professional learning progression with the individual schools that are selected to participate in the Rose Grant. And all this, we hope will benefit the entire system. While we're starting narrow, we want to go broad by creating a guidance on professional learning and ways in which we can better address the screening, the assessment, the education of, and the identification of EML students. Next slide, please. And so we always know that there are challenges. The district has been very busy over the last few years, so time is always of the essence. But we want to create, in collaboration with our stakeholders and most importantly with our schools, to design the professional learning connected to their school improvement plan that will lead to better outcomes in terms of our EML students and to reduce over-identification with this particular group of students. And we hope what we find will also be able to transfer to other student groups so that other students, even though we have a focus on EML students in over-identification and special education, this other student groups can benefit from this as well. We also want to identify opportunities for sustainability. For example, the work that we've started with the interpreters is something that will benefit the system if we figure out how to do that, continue that program so we can have very well-versed interpreters who understand the EMT IEP process and the vocabulary that goes along with that to support our families. And the other important piece is engaging our parents, because even native English-speaking parents in IEP meetings are oftentimes not quite sure of all the nuances in those meetings. And so, again, creating space where parents can be empowered to make the best decisions for their children. And with that, I will end this portion of the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Badi, and thank you for coming back after retirement to help lead this grant. And thank you, Dr. Swenson, for being on the team. Now, I'm going to open up for questions to my colleagues.
I'll go first. Thank you so much for being here. I just think this is vital work, and I'm a straight shooter. I'm incredibly disappointed that this work is being done in 2025, and we should have been much more advanced than some other jurisdictions with the amount of EML students that we have had and the patterns that we have seen for over a decade in this particular area. So though I am thrilled, please don't take it personally, I'm thrilled that you guys are you're driving the bus in a sense, but I do have some questions about some of the numbers you gave us. On page 9, and I know this is a small example, but I really would like a little bit more disaggregated data because this is an overall kind of look. I would like to have gender put in there. Because gender to me is important in a sense because we know disproportionately, especially in the African American community and the Latino community, boys are usually much more a higher level disproportionately than girls are. So I would love to know that. I would love to know also the grades that we're talking about, because I know as an advocate, my experience has also been that we identify EML students with special needs sometimes in a later time than we should. So there's also that disparity, and I don't see that here. But if we could get that for slide 9 and for page 10, and I don't even. Upset would be a minor thing for me to say that I'm upset. I'm just incredibly disappointed of the high proportions of it. But again, it is the largest population group of Latino students do form a large population of the ESOL population, right? So we know that we have been seeing this trend, and I myself for years have been saying that we need to focus on this population because they, it's a little bit late in middle school, it's a little bit late in high school when we try to get the tools to help them, that this has to be done early on. So I heard about interpreters. I have to tell you, as a former interpreter for 2 decades, in the legal field and also in the health field, interpreting is a vocation and a profession, right? So just because, you know, somebody in your building speaks the language and so on, they might not be the best fit. So when you're doing, and to me, doing psychological evaluations or doing any of those evaluations with an interpreter, you're already at a disadvantage. And you know in your field that any professional will tell you that you're already at a disadvantage. That is not going to be the most appropriate way to be able to conduct an evaluation of a child with an IEP, right? And then you add to that the interpreter might not have the skills, the language to do an evaluation with an IEP. Because that again, so I'm happy to see that. Had a couple questions. Who's going to evaluate the interpreter, right? Because you need that. Is there going to be a differential pay for those interpreters for having the skill? As somebody who actually established some of these programs in our local hospitals, right, we had a whole thing where the interpreter had to be evaluated and so on. So I don't know if that's in your, but I didn't hear anything about the number one thing, which is the assessment, right? The assessment. Because if you're doing the assessment in English, so there's two routes, right? So you identify the child either speaks English or doesn't speak English, right? So then you focus on the child doesn't speak English, so their family, so on. So do you use that English evaluation and you do the translation? Because to me, that's again a disadvantage because you have, there's a reason why we have standardized testing, right? Because they've been tested in big groups of people and so on. So if you just do the translation, again, right, your results are going to be misleading because there could be a question in that assessment. I'll give you an example of baseball, right, which happened to me when I was being evaluated for speech pathology when I was in elementary school. I had no idea what baseball was. So my question to that would have been very different than a kid that is actually exposed to baseball, correct? So for me, if you need to look at the standardized of testing for these groups. And that's why I wish Dr. Ortiz was here, because I think it would be good to ask the expert, right? What are the tools that we are giving our folks to be able to evaluate? So I want to know what are we actually using to evaluate our EML special education kids versus, you know, and if we are doing the translation, I would like to hear from the experts for them to tell me, Board Member Rivera, it is a great idea to do that, or to say no, you know, we need to look at actually something that it has been proven, right, without biases, that we're gonna get the right results for this population. So that is what, and I didn't hear in your presentation anything about evaluations. The other, I had another question. So you mentioned, Dr. Ortiz, you mentioned a couple other folks, Dr. Elbert Ortiz as well. Can you just tell me a little bit, what's the background with Dr. Ortiz? What is his expertise in?
He is a psychologist, a professor, and he has done a lot of work around language development and those kind of things to, which is why he came up with the PVAT assessment, because there's been this gap in assessing EML students accurately. So his assessment is normed not only for English native speakers, but normed for speakers of other where English is not their first language. And so I know he uses a series of pictures for this assessment, and he can identify, and this assessment helps to identify, tease out, is it language development and exposure to English, or is it possibly some other learning challenge?
Like a cognitive challenge.
Right.
So any of your consultants actually have the expertise with special education?
Inger, can't think off the top of my head.
Many of them that we've talked about have the expertise that focuses primarily around the language development. I think one of the things that we are really focused on, especially when we're looking at how we are partnering with other offices, we have expertise internally around special education. And I think that that expertise is extremely strong, just as we have strong expertise in Delmy around the language piece as well. But one of the things that we are really trying to do is elevate understanding the difference between a language acquisition and whether or not there is a intellectual
Correct.
disability. So what was also important was for us to think about, well, who is familiar with MCPS as well? Dr. Ortiz has done work in MCPS before. Kelly Ryder has done work in MCPS before and has also taught ESOL. I believe she taught ESOL here in MCPS. Looking at it from a broader sense, the other organization that we were focusing on, AES, they have expertise in the identification, in the MTSS processes, the multi-tiered systems of support processes, and if I remember correctly, I think one of their consultants with that group does have a background in special education, but I can certainly go back and ensure that we provide that information.
Yeah, the only reason I bring that up is because it's, you know, this is a specific group of students, and I would like to know if we looked at other jurisdictions like New York or California or even Texas. You know, this is not a new challenge to a school system this big, right? Who has actually seen this challenge, overtaken this challenge. I believe I read something in California, in San Diego, they had a similar situation, and one of the outcomes in that jurisdiction was that using an interpreter, although if the interpreter could be efficient, it was already there has to be also a cultural component to it, right? Because as you said, the parents also have to kind of be involved and so on. But they found that when the assessment was done in the native language by the therapist or the psychologist, it was a much better outcome, right, to see exactly what the child needed versus having a third party. It's like doing therapy with an interpreter, right? No, people are not going to be as candid, right, if you have a third party in it. And I have to tell you, to be an interpreter, it means to be invisible in the room. Like you cannot have your, you know, you have to literally, the training, it's pretty intense because, and like I said, not everybody can do it. So I'm just curious if we have looked into neighboring jurisdictions, how, you know, other jurisdictions that have a high EML population like DC and others, how they deal with this issue. Have we?
We have been collaborating with some of the other grant recipients in Maryland to have conversations. We reached out to, Ingrid did a lot of outreach to other spaces and places. Their focus is a little bit different. It's focused on over-identification, but their target group is not EML. So, we talk and collaborate to kind of learn from each other, but we haven't looked at other districts in terms of how they deliver, you know, because here in Montgomery County, we have the bilingual assessors, so we know that we do have that in place, but we should do more digging. We could do a little more research.
Right, and although I appreciate the bilingual assessment, again, what my question is that was that system translated from English into Spanish? Because again, I'm going to make the argument that if it was, that we might want to take a relook at that assessment. Because just because you translate something, because we know that the English assessment was tested, right, on a group of folks, and we know that that was the best, but it wasn't tested, right, in Spanish. Sure that we're not just translating, especially when we're doing evaluations of cognitive and reading, and that we're not just translating, but we actually have the best test possible to be testing a population, that we're going to be making a lot of assumptions and decisions on their career path and the education system. So Again, I don't know if this grant gives you that resource. If it doesn't, then maybe we should talk about it, right, to get it done. But again, just translating assessment that we have into English and using that same assessment, maybe this is one of the reasons why we have such an overrepresentation of IEP of students, who are ESOL in our system, right? So I want us to look. I don't want us to put a Band-Aid solution on it. I appreciate the interpreting position, but I want us to really deeply look into the tools that we're using to see if they're the appropriate tools to be assessing EML students that we have a sense that they are special needs.
And so,
Good
Good
I was
morning.
going to say I saw Ms. Wiles at the table. She's our Associate Superintendent for Special Education. Do you have some comments?
Sure. Good morning, Ms. Yang, Ms. Harris, Ms. Rivera-Oven. So I did want to address that point with regard to evaluation of students who are non-native English speakers. So as Dr. Boddy indicated, we do have behavior assessment, the bilingual assessment team that works closely with us when we have students who are non-native English speakers who need to be evaluated to determine if they are eligible for special education services. There are assessments that we use that are in Spanish. So some of the cognitive and educational assessments are provided in Spanish. Obviously, that is the number one language that our students who are EML speak. However, one of the things that we have to consider, first of all, IDEA requires us to look at the cultural aspect of when we assess students and whether or not the assessment tool that we're using is appropriate for students who don't speak English as their native language. So that's a requirement of the law. To the extent that we can identify assessment tools that are appropriate for non-English speakers, we do, and we utilize those tools. However, we have students that come from far and wide, various countries, they speak various languages. Some countries that don't have standardized assessment tools that we can use. And so that's where there is a significance and importance of using the interpreters to help support the assessments that we have, because we may not have an assessment tool that is in the person's native language, and in the country that they come from, they just may not have a norm-based assessment that we can utilize. Psychologists are trained to look at all of those things as they're doing assessments of students and to report them, so that if there either are non-standardized ways that they have to evaluate students, they report on that. If they had to use language or terms or pictures or things to cue students in ways that would not be non-standardized, so that they can get the best information that they possibly can in evaluating students, they report on that. And sometimes that's the case. In some instances where we've had students who speak languages that we can't find someone from the BAT team to help support the assessment, we've even gone to the embassy and tried to get them to help identify interpreters who could support us assessing students, because we don't want to over-identify students, and we want to make sure that we have the best information that we can when we sit down to evaluate students for special education services. But the assessment is only a part of it, and as Dr. Boddy explained, the other part of the significance of training interpreters is understanding the language so that when they sit at the IEP team table and the report is being explained to the family, the IEP is being explained, the process is being explained, they know how to help the parent understand what the language is in the process so that parents can actively participate as they're required and as we're required to ensure that they do throughout the IEP process.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. But Ms. Yan, since you're the expert in it, could you just then clarify for me the testing that we are currently using in Montgomery County Public Schools for evaluating children with IEPs who are EML students? That test, who developed that test? Do we develop that test, or that's a standard test
So when you are evaluating a student to determine either initial or continued eligibility for special education services, you can use a multitude of assessment tools. When we talk about standardized or norm reference assessments,
That's what
we
I'm
don't
talking
create those.
Okay.
Those are assessments that we purchase from a vendor that has a long history of doing assessments of students for the purpose of evaluating for cognitive ability, academic ability.
Correct. So those vendors, they provide you then the Spanish version of those tests.
So where it is available and we have the ability to do those assessments, yes. So for example, for the cognitive assessment, we may have a Spanish version of the cognitive assessment that we use. If there's a Spanish version of the assessments, it's been norm referenced in that language.
Okay, so thank you. In the interest of time and for the audience out there, I want to give the numbers so we understand a little bit the scope we're talking about. So we have heard before from staff report that in our system is about 6,000 students duly identified as with special education and multilingual learners, right? Is that correct? Correct, okay. And then all of these over 6,000, about 6,000 students, 4,600 are Hispanic students. That's Hispanic speaking students. Is that correct?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that sounds correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to put that in the framework of our discussion. So first of all, I appreciate that the system is doing this work. I know we are one of the 3 districts that actually took the initiative, identified an area of need to apply for the grant to do this work. So I applaud our effort. And I know my colleagues have other questions, but I would really like to know, what I really like to know, so at the end of the day, how do I know we have been successful with the Rose Grant? So can you give me high level 1, 2, 3? If we are able to do these 3 things, we have been successful with Rose Grant.
So, I thought you were pressing the button. So one of the things is we should see better assessment and a drop in the identification of EML students into special education. That's one. We should see improved efficacy from educators in terms of knowing how to better support EML students. So that's knowledge and skills and strategies presented in the classroom, which aligns to all the work that's been done around cultural responsiveness and those kind of things. So we should be more responsive to our EML students. We should see improved communication within EMT and IP meetings in terms of parents having even a better understanding or feeling that they have a more clarity as they go through the process. And those are just a few things. So teacher efficacy, a reduction in the over-identification, parental understanding in terms of they understood the process, they understood the conversations that were going on in those meetings, and they felt as though they had the information they needed to make decisions for their child. In addition to, we may learn some things along the way in terms of how we can even better set up, stand in alignment of the rules and regulations and federal laws that pertain to special education. We may find some other additional things that we do to help mitigate some of the challenges with EMT and IEP meetings and ensuring that parents have the information, or we give them the information, but are they able to process, understand, and again, make those good decisions for their child?
So
I just wanted to add just a little bit more, because I think what's also critical here is that when you talk about the analysis of the data that we receive on student performance, teams will have a more robust discussion around understanding what this data tells us, not just formal, but also the informal data points. When we talk about teachers working together, special education teachers, ELD teachers, and general educations, it's opportunities to plan for that learner and to understand their profile so that the instructional strategies that are used are going to match that learner. So it will reduce the identification, but it'll also allow for improved instructional strategies.
okay, thank you. So, but this is a grant. So what we are doing is on a small scale, try to learn some best lessons for these 4 points you talk about: reduction, better training, better communication of the process, and better working and other documentation of the process. So we are gathering best practices through this grant, hoping to have a wider system implication. Am I understanding this correctly?
Thank you. You've summarized it well.
Yeah. So Ms. Harris, you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. I do appreciate that we're having this conversation, because we are now a school system with 20% of our students are emergent multilingual learners. That's 1 in 5. We know as a system we have chronically failed these students going back more than a decade. And so when you look at our performance data and it's not good, when we are not doing a very good job with 1 in 5 of our students, no wonder our data is not good. And so I really appreciate, because I also see that that is an area of work that we must dramatically improve. But also our special education services, I think everybody or many would agree, is probably our most fraught area of work, based on our inboxes, based on the numbers that we see and the programs that we're rolling out. And so one of the things that I'm really interested to know is, you talked, and I appreciate this, part of the Rose Grant is looking at improving our communications around this entire process with families. And so when we know that the process around IEPs and identifying students for services and identifying which services are appropriate, that is a fraught process. And we have highly educated, native English-speaking parents whose professional areas of expertise may touch on, the legalities of IDEA or other areas of special education work, and they cannot. They struggle with our process. So I'm really interested to see how we identify best practices for families who are not native English speakers, who are new to the United States, who are new to our system of education, and how we help them get through a process that our highly professional, highly educated, native English-speaking families struggle with. And so I'm hoping perhaps some of these best practices couldn't apply to more than just this identified population, because it is an area of work with which we continuously struggle.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good plug for us to talk about the Parent Resource Center. And so a lot of that work is being done with our Parent Resource Center, where we're reaching out to families so that we are providing them workshops, opportunities to learn the process even before an IEP meeting, or to reach out to someone after an IEP meeting if they have questions, because it can be a very intimidating process for any parent, let alone a parent who may not speak English. We are fully committed to ensuring that parents understand, and when they sit at that table, what is being said about their child, what the school system intends to do, and then have an ability to question what the school system says. This is what we see in assessments in the classroom. Tell me what you see at home. That's a commitment that we have. It's a requirement under the law, but it also is a commitment that we have because we want parents to be fully participatory in that process. Yeah. And so we are continuing. This is the second year that we've had our Parent Resource Center. We're continuing to build that out. so that we can offer more opportunities to provide more workshops, more opportunities for parents to collaborate with each other. Obviously, if we had more money to support that effort, we would be able to do more and bring in some additional staff to reach out to more families.
Thank you. So a couple nuts and bolts questions for me. First of all, the assessment that you've mentioned from Dr. Ortiz, could you tell me one more time what that is, what that acronym stands for, what it's actually called?
It is the Ortiz Picture Vocabulary Acquisition Test, or
Pinter?
PVAT.
Picture.
Picture, sorry.
Picture vocabulary.
Okay. And so looking at the numbers in your, the first year, you said you had 53 students who were part of this initial work. How were they identified? And is this at a particular school, or was this a system-wide identification?
So I'm going to let Ingrid answer that part.
The students that you are referring to, the 53 students.
Yeah, you said you
which
had,
page am I?
in this group, you had 53 students in the cohort, so these were duly identified. These are 53 students in the cohort for looking at the over-identification piece. 28 of them were duly identified. So just wondering, who are these students? I mean, how were they identified? Is this a school or system-wide?
This was system-wide. This was system-wide.
Okay.
The identification was system-wide.
What grade level?
I think they were K through 12.
Okay. Okay. And so when you are looking at, you said on slide 16, part of the work going on now is selecting participating schools.
Right.
For year 2, how many schools are you choosing?
We are looking at a cluster model. So looking at middle school and its feeder elementary schools. Again, to get at, I think, an earlier discussion, making sure that we're getting kids or students at an earlier grade so that it doesn't all of a sudden, they start appearing in middle and high school. And so we're going to focus in on we're going to try to narrow it down to two clusters of middle schools and their feeder schools.
And what are the criterion you're looking to make that choice?
Using the numbers in terms of over-identification, we looked at which clusters there were pockets, higher pockets of those students.
Okay. And so, again, you're looking to be and that work is happening now. You'll identify them, I'm assuming, by the summer so that the training can happen. Okay.
Yeah.
And you talked about the work of the interpreters, that they'd gone down to the University of Georgia for this specialized training. How many interpreters were in that first cohort?
So it was virtual, so we didn't have to send them. So there were 30. So we're looking at, the next group will be a group of 30 interpreters, and then our third cohort will be another 30.
Okay, and these are centralized folks, so these people are not school-based staff?
They're in our interpreter bank, so they're not centralized.
Okay. Okay, and then when you are, one of the things I think I'm looking at with interest is you're mentioning on the timeline and on slide 16, you're going to be, and this was also previously, you're going to be doing training of staff. And you mentioned through the new educator orientation, and then you also mentioned selected Rose Grant school staff members. So when, for that second group, the Rose Grant school staff members, those are going to be the staff members in your two clusters?
Yeah.
Okay.
And go ahead, ask your question.
No,
I was going to say, and our intent is to have our consultants work with those schools as they plan for school improvement, because we want to make sure everything is wed. So to align that support to what the schools need. So we want to customize it to meet their school goals and their work with their EML students in those particular schools.
And so I think one of my concerns looking at this work, so I think you said it's a 3-year grant. And so any changes in practice that are initiated, identified as best practices that we want to scale up, we're going to have to build these into our base budget. And one of the things that you mentioned is a high level in the implementation side of consultants with ongoing support for our teachers and providing coaching, modeling, I'm guessing job-embedded coaching, which is highly effective. But one of the issues that we have in MCPS, I think, is, and I hear this from teachers who are ESOL, ELD teachers in our system who have taught in other systems. One of the things I hear repeatedly is that other systems provide far more direct support to them from their central ELD staff, job embedded, the same kind of things you're mentioning here, job embedded coaching, mentoring, helping develop best practices and developing their skills in the classroom. But I believe our central staff for ELD is, 3 people? It's not very many. And so we don't provide that service. That is not something, I've had ELD teachers tell me their central support is pretty much limited to getting reminders to give their students assessments and enter their assessment data in 3 different databases. So nothing around the practice of teaching. So this is going to be a huge lift for us. I see Dr. Pugh's light is on.
Sure, it is. I mean, one of those barriers is the small number of central support to give direct service and the model of supervision, right? Teachers of all content areas and all specialty areas are supervised at their school level. And so we have our professional days, we also have our summer learning, but we do have currently the staff development teachers, we also have our reading specialists. And I see, because I get to see a broad scope of it, is our opportunity is embedding this work in all of the professional learning, right? So that it's not just one and done, but that it is built into the practices that we do when we're talking about English and English assessments, that it's built into the practices that are supported as schools are looking at their school improvement data in a ongoing monitoring of current data, understanding that when the data says that we have students in this particular group or any group really in our multi-tiered system of support who are not progressing, that we have answers for what to do about that. And we have strategies that we can really introduce and broaden and practice, right? It'll be new. It'll be a new practice. It's the same as planning for, we do often say it separately, plan for your English learners and then plan for your special education students and then plan to be culturally responsive. But for a teacher, they have all those and they have all mixes of all kinds of students. And so it's upon us, where we have deep expertise in each of these areas, to make sure that what we're doing in terms of professional learning is integrating it. Staff struggle with getting information from a content area and then all the specialty areas. It's on us to, in our professional learning, embed that so that it's together, so that when we're talking about collaborative planning for great first instruction, that we know what that is and what are the strategies that we hope that we learn from this work. And the tools, you mentioned the tools, because sometimes when you're working with a student, you really don't know, is this a language acquisition problem? Is this a background knowledge problem? Or is this, some other contextual problem? And we want to make sure that we know and teachers and schools have guidance around what to look for and what tools to use to be able to give them the best information, so that really we're talking about providing students services to allow them to access grade level instruction and accelerate their learning, not provide them separately, and which has sort of historically happened. So I appreciate very much the question and the structure. I've been thinking about it since I arrived here in Montgomery County Public Schools, about how do we have direct support and direct conversation and communication with teachers who are implementing every single day the planning. So we've been working on that across our offices. We're also working with the school support and well-being, so that we're an integral part of what does the school improvement plan look like? What data do we have? What are our data monitoring cycles? So thank you.
Yeah, and
Can I just add, I just wanted to add to what Dr. Pugh said. This is not a no cost moving forward once the grant is over, and it is a heavy lift. But what it does do is position us to have the information and the best practices that perhaps we haven't had in the past that we can embed into what we do in the future. Office of Special Education does professional learning on a regular basis throughout the school year, does focused professional learning in the summer. So when we plan for professional learning for our new teachers, when we plan with our partner offices and the psychological services and various other offices, we can ensure that we're embedding what we learn through this process and the processes that we create through this grant in those professional learning opportunities. I'm sure that Ms. Hewitt would agree with you that her office needs to be bigger. But again, as they provide professional learning, these are practices that we can embed in what we do moving forward. And so that's the key to sustainability. Not only what are we doing during the life of the grant, but what are we taking from what we learned and what we developed so that moving forward, we're using those practices for all of our teachers and service providers.
Well, I mean, that gets to my last question. So in essence, in the school system we have now, every single teacher, this gets to Dr. Body's, story about his entree into Montgomery County Public Schools, which was not yesterday. So it does get to this work is long overdue. But it does get to every teacher in Montgomery County Public Schools. When 1 in 5 students is an emergent multilingual learner, every teacher in MCPS has got to be an ELD teacher. And so what are we doing to continuously monitor the quality of the professional development we are delivering? How are we hearing from teachers that their input, their feedback on the training that they're receiving, and how are we monitoring throughout the school year from them, the boots on the ground educators that are in the classroom, how well that training has achieved its goal, and what are we then doing to improve that training so that we are supposed to be in a continuous improvement cycle. So how are we monitoring and planning for the improvement of that training?
So that's absolutely the work of Margie Lope-Mustasso's office, where they have developed and continue to roll out ways that we're ensuring that what we're offering as professional learning is actually working, that we're giving the recipients of professional learning opportunities to provide feedback so that we can improve. I don't remember, there are people in the room that know all of the names in terms of the systems that are being put in place. Can't recall them off the top of my head, but that's absolutely the work that's being done in her office, so that we're not just unilaterally saying this is what we think you need, but that we're getting that feedback so that we can improve and enhance as we continue to provide that professional learning.
Okay.
I would love to see that feedback. I mean, it's not urgent, but just so we can see from our teachers how that's going in that kind of ongoing cycle of implementation and evaluation. Thank you.
There's a saying that good teaching is good teaching. And whether a student is a special education student or student coded as a EML students, they're all our students. And I would really like to see in our future work, as we plan for future years' trainings, that how we, there are strategies in ELD, there are strategies in special education that are good practices that we can use in every single classroom. So I'm very much interested in seeing how, as a system, we are embedding those strategies into our trainings for our general ed teachers, for all educators, for paras, for bus drivers, for our administrators and officers. So that is a topic for another time. I would really like to discuss that. But in the interest of time today, I know we have another topic, so I would like to move on to the next topic.
Sure.
pass the mic to you.
Thank you very much. It's been a great discussion, and I also appreciate very much your interest and your questionings, because it does help us share better what we are doing and what we are planning, and examine those things that maybe we've been doing that haven't been working. So I wanted to share that so sort of the progression is that we had very much a system of ongoing professional learning that was happening prior to pandemic. Then we also had a shift in the approaches to that during pandemic for the obvious reasons. And coming back, we had the board commissioned the anti-racist audit, which gave a lot of very scathing, I'll say, feedback to us about how what we were doing wasn't necessarily working. In response to that, the district has developed the Equitable Teaching and Learning Framework, which is now sort of the umbrella for all of the professional learning. And I just, that is new work, and that is new work system-wide that we're continuing to roll out and plan. And that is where under that umbrella, this work will live and be embedded. And again, you said topic for another time, so it is June 11th, I believe, there's a presentation to the board on professional learning. So we'll hopefully be able to answer additional questions about teacher feedback. So at this time, I believe we're turning it over to Kia Middleton-Murphy.
So I feel like we're old friends at this point. So I'll greet you again, Ms. Yang, Ms. Rivera-Oven, and Ms. Harris. Thank you for having this opportunity. Today I also have with me Mr. Brent Mascott, the principal of Weller Road. And I think that this will get to some of the questioning that we just previously heard when you talk about what's being provided, how it's being monitored, and how we adjust as we move along. Because the one component that we didn't talk about is making sure that our leaders, that is our school-based leaders, are aware of what is happening, so that then when you talk about that day-to-day monitoring, because no matter how many central office staff you have, they're not going to be in the school day-to-day. So I have Mr. Mascott to talk about what that looks in practice. So today we'll talk about inclusive practices for special education students who are duly identified as EML students, as well as students receiving special education services. Next slide, please. The imperative for the inclusion of students with receiving special education services begins with IDEA. And why this is important is because it means that regardless of the disability or the impact of the disability, that students are given the access to the general education curriculum, to the classroom, and to everything that their non-disabled peers have access to. This is founded in research, and then as well as you see it in the IEP process. What makes this extremely important is that students have the right to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, as we've called it today. This is entitlement. It means that at the expense of the county, at no expense to parents, that students will receive access to the curriculum that's aligned with state standards, that students will have their IEPs implemented, and that their unique needs will be met. It means that all of this happens, and it must happen, in the least restrictive environment. Next slide, please. Just giving you an opportunity to take a look at this quote. It comes from the U.S. Office of Special Education, Ideas That Work, and the University of Kansas Beach Center on Disability, entitled School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation. There's over 30 years worth of research that supports that data-driven inclusion improves outcomes for students. Some of those benefits include improved academic performance in math as well as reading. Positive educational benefit comes with social, emotional, behavioral, and post-secondary outcomes. For all students, and inclusive opportunities create high expectations. Let us not forget that it also impacts the work that students are developing their peer relationships, and teachers are understanding the process of how to work with students. We're giving the opportunity for teachers to learn not only the culturally responsive aspects of it, but also to respect that learners are different, and so that we meet them where they are. Next slide, please. So again, inclusive practices in special education, the evidence-based factors that are required for the successful inclusive practices. They include the administrative leadership, not only at central office, but also at the school-based. They include using multi-tiered system of supports. What can we do? What changes do we need to make? Let's first support the student without going immediately to special education services. However, as we know, we cannot deny a student child find. Family and community engagement. And it starts with just understanding school and understanding all of the different resources that schools have, which is why our family support services person has become so integral in our process. Not only does she conduct workshops with other offices, but she's also outreaching to parents. She's attending IEP meetings with them. And then, of course, she attends our monthly meetings with special education parents with CCAC. It also includes a framework for inclusive education. As you can see, the school-based structures. We're looking at our master schedule. How are we providing those opportunities for co-taught, for supported classes? How are we including our students? The school culture is supportive of inclusion. What are the activities that we're having? What are the extracurricular activities that we're having? And then, of course, the system-wide structures of professional learning. And it has to be, as you indicated earlier, the job-embedded coaching, the monitoring, and the accountability. And it's important to note that not all of our students can be included 100% of the time. So that is why we have to have a continuum. But then, of course, there are times when a student is included and we note that they're having trouble. So what is that all about? That's when we as educators have to say, what is this child communicating to us? What do we need to do differently? What do they need? And so when we think about strategies that support an inclusive environment where students will thrive, it is going to be the culturally responsive strategies. It is going to be engaging the parents and the guardians or the family. It is going to be on focusing on student outcomes, establishing those clear expectations and routines. It is getting to know your students and how they communicate. It is bringing the appropriate services to the student in the general education environment, whether it's related services or it's assistive technology. It's also making sure that we observe and understand that the specially designed instruction is being provided with accommodations and supplementary aids and services that are outlined in the student's IEP. The most important part of all of this is that teachers are working together, whether they are general education teachers, special education teachers, ELD teachers, reading specialists, math content coaches, whomever is servicing the students, that they are working together because the responsibility is a shared responsibility. Teachers have to work together to provide appropriate instruction. Next slide, please. Here is a page from an individualized education program. It is the page that talks about serving students in the least restrictive environment. This is where teachers come together along with the special educator, the IEP team as a whole to look at the data, to talk about the data, the analysis of it, and to make determinations about what services the student requires. And of course, those services must be in the least restrictive environment. And then we have to articulate the rationale for why they will be served in whatever environment that may be. And that is with great consideration to where they can be included with their non-disabled peers. Next slide. So here we have, and Dr. Pugh mentioned this earlier, our state performance plan. We receive information from MSDE about this time each year. Actually, it's in May, where they give us our performance plan indicators, and particularly looking at the least restrictive environment in A as well as in C. And so earlier we defined that the least restrictive environment for A is when the student is served in the general education for greater than or equal to 71%. This is based on 2-year lagging data. And so this data shows that MCPS has not met the standard for LRE A and C for the past 3 federal fiscal years, which include the pandemic. Next slide. Sure.
Sorry, just for the sake of the people, for the folks at home, can you just explain what that SRE means, just quickly so they get an idea
Okay.
of what they're looking at.
If you could go back to the previous slide, please.
Thank you.
Okay. So when you talk about LRE-A, least restrictive environment A, students are included in the general education for greater than or equal to 71%. That's the state target. And so for the last 3 years, MCPS has not met that target.
We've been under, correct?
We've been under it, yes. So we need to be at it or above it to meet it.
71%.
Yes.
Okay, thank
Yes. And then, of course, for LREC, which is a more restrictive environment, we must have less than or equal to 11.75%. We have been above it, which means we do not meet it for the last 3 years.
Another clarifying question. So you call this lagging data. This is significantly lagging data because we're at the end of FY24. So we're missing 3 years here. So do we know, 3 years is a long time. Do we have any idea where we are now?
Great question. Thank you for that next prompt. Please take a look at the next slide. So this is where we are as of April 12th, 2024. Okay. And so this is broken down a little bit more for you. And so this is for special education services ages 6 through 21. And this is pulled from our Maryland Online Individualized Education Program data. It's important to note the differences in LRE by race. As was previously stated, students receiving special education services in the general education environment have better academic achievement and social emotional success than those who do not have access to the general education environment. Now that we've laid the foundation for that discussion about inclusion for students and the importance as well as the benefits, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Brent Mascott, the principal of Weller Road, to share some of those realities of providing inclusive services. And those realities come with success as well as challenge.
Thank you, Kia. Thank you, Kia. Next slide, please. So good morning, Ms. Rivera Oven, Ms. Yang, Ms. Harris, Ms. Webb. Thank you so much. I'm glad I'm here to talk about this important work and how it translates and how it looks at Weller Road. So excited to be here. Next slide, please. So before I dive in, here are just some demographic and some information about Weller Road. I'll just highlight the 3 points that 51% of our students are EMLs. 12.92% of our students receive special education services, and of the students receiving special education services, 66.3% of the students who receive special education services are also EMLs, or duly identified students. Okay, next slide, please. So, Ms. Harris, I think you said it best when you mentioned that all of our staff need to be ELD teachers, right? And that's the one message that I share at the beginning of the year to really set that tone as the building leader, that this work is important. And so all of our teachers, classroom teachers, ELD teachers, special education teachers, all of the teachers, paraeducators, right? We're all EML teachers or ELD teachers. We're all special education teachers, right? We're all responsible for providing the best strategies we can, the support of our students. And so that starts with me, and those are messages that I speak about at the beginning of the year and then certainly throughout the year as well. Kia talked a little bit about master schedule, right? So we have to also make sure that our structures are in place to best support our students. And so we are right in that process now of finalizing our master schedule. But before we start, we talk about what are those non-negotiables. Right? What are those key things that we have to have in our master schedule to give us, to ensure that we're providing our students, our EML students, our special ed students with the best access. And so we make sure that we stagger our literacy, our reading blocks, our math blocks, our intervention blocks, so that we can maximize the amount of staff that can be supporting students, maximize our staff that can be providing co-teaching. So that's a non-negotiable that we talk about. We talked a lot about professional development. We also take a lot of pride, and we really make sure that we have collaborative planning schedules set up so that all teachers that work with students in that grade level are able to be at collaborative planning to share expertise in a given content that can be there to really talk about our students. And so that's our, non-classroom staff, like our reading specialist, staff development teacher, math content coaches, but it's also the classroom teachers, the intervention teachers, our special ed teachers, and our EML teachers are all there 2 to 3 times a week talking about not only the curriculum, but really talking about those best practices, really anticipating some barriers, confusion to support our students. Next slide, please. Next slide, so that's just a copy of our master schedule. You can keep going. And then the next slide is just a copy of our planning schedule. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so one of the things that we talk about over the summer is our school improvement plan. And our school improvement plan is directly connects to our EML students, directly connects to our special ed students, those duly identified students. We need to make sure that the students that make up a significant portion of our school, that we are triangulating all of our resources to really make sure that we are meeting their needs. And so that's definitely a part of our school improvement plan. Second, that professional learning. And I'm going to go into a little bit more examples. So the professional development that we have at our school is so critical to the success. We've talked a lot about professional development from the school system, but as the principal, I'm also charged with making sure that the staff in our building is equipped with those best practices to support every learner, every student that comes into our building. And that's a real focus that we've had. I often say that as a leader, we don't have a buffet of staff meetings, right? It's not going to be a little bit of this month, or let's talk a little bit about that the next month. Everything that we have done this year, the majority of what we've done this year with our professional learning is all geared towards this work, supporting our EMLs, our students with special education services, those duly identified students. So just a couple of examples of what we've done. We've done case studies where we've picked specific students to really get to know them, understanding their 4 domains for EMLs, right? What does the student really look like? If we have a student who's an EML 2, what does that really look like? Going through the practice of really getting to know students. We've done professional development on co-teaching, different models, co-planning. How can we set up our structures? How can we listen from our teachers to say, what do they need from us, right, in terms of supports to make the co-planning and co-teaching as effective as possible? We've analyzed WIDA speaking rubrics. We've done a lot with supporting speaking of all of our students, and there's others. But one of the things that when we do this work, we do them with the entire staff. We invite our paraeducators to those training sessions. We bring our art, music, PE, our specialists. What a great opportunity for our specialists to work on different speaking and language acquisition with our EML students. They are all there at the table doing this important work. And then the last point about getting feedback, I talked about that. How can we really listen to our teachers to make sure that we are hearing them, that we are getting their voice? One of the things that they had talked about was wanting more feedback, right? They wanted more feedback. And so we've gotten to a really good practice of this instructional and feedback, this coaching cycle. So we have our professional development that we really focus on with our staff. Core team members, which has included the administration, our reading specialist, staff development teacher. We then spend time going in the classrooms, giving feedback. We have our leadership team meeting going in and doing walkthroughs, giving feedback to staff on that very professional development that we did so that we can make sure that the work that we've talked about doing, that it's really impacting our students in a successful way. So those are just 3 of those best practices that we really try to bring to light. Next slide, please. We also really make sure that the instructional models are there. So one of the things that we talk about is this is work for our EML students, our duly identified students, but this work is good for every student in the building. And I can't stress that enough, right? This is work that's critical for our EML students and our students receiving special ed services, but these are also just great instructional practices that support all of our students. That teacher voice, again, I mentioned that about really just talking to them and making sure that we are hearing what they need. That's something that we do at our leadership meetings quite often. We will ask our leadership team to get feedback from their teachers, to give us data, to give us input of how we can continue to provide professional development, right? That is really supporting our teachers to support students. We don't know all the, I'm not a classroom teacher. We don't know exactly what the teachers need unless we are talking to them and really looking at that data. So it's really important for us. And that parent, caregiver, student engagement as well is very critical. One of the things that we have really made a focus is bringing as many parents into the building with different events, hearing from them. So we have lots of community events. Ms. Yang was actually at our Weller Road Day just the other day last week, and many parents are there, but we also have different events like Principal's Coffee, where we talk about best practices for our EML students or students receiving special ed services so that families are equipped with different supports and strategies that they can do at their house to support the work that we're doing. We have our family learning night each year that we bring families in, same thing, we're teaching them the same types of strategies, the same types of supports that we're providing our students, we're giving to our families to help with that as well. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture of a classroom teacher and one of our special education co-teachers or special education teachers co-teaching. That is, again, such a big idea at our school that we know is successful. And oftentimes you might ask a teacher or ask a student, who is the classroom teacher, the EML teacher? They might not know because at any given time we have different individuals taking the lead. And I think that's so important of just that inclusive mindset as well, that we are all doing this work. It's that shared responsibility. Okay, next slide, please. So what does this look like in terms of data, right? So here are just some high-level impacts that we have had. So definitely that growth mindset and high expectations for our students, right? The more that we are emphasizing the work that is important, that we're creating the kind of that shift in mindset for our staff. We definitely have that increased inclusive model for our students, having the supports in the classroom to support their needs. Increased family communication and engagement. We've been very happy with the work that we've done in that department. Improved student oral communication and instructional engagement. That's been a huge lift for us. Is the one domain that we've been really elevating is the speaking domain, and it's so great that those opportunities can be done everywhere. We even had a session with our paraeducators talking about how we can elevate that work at lunch and recess, right? Just finding those times to really promote the speaking and oral communication. And then lastly, what I'm going to talk about right now is improved achievement data. So the next couple slides, next slide, please. So the next couple slides do go over some data that I will speak on. So this is MAP P and MAP M. This is all math data with only looking at our duly identified students. And so you can see the grade level on the left. The middle column is the expected growth that the county expects students to make on that assessment from fall to winter. And if you look to the right, that was the average growth of our duly identified students. And so you can see K through 3, we all exceeded that expected growth in some grade levels significantly. We did not meet that in 4th and 5th grade, but we're trending in the right direction with our younger learners, and so we're really proud of that work. Next slide, please. So this is similar data with reading. In K2, they look at DIBELS, and then in grades 3 through 5, they look at MAP-R. Again, those assessments, this data is similar. It's just looking at our duly identified students and looking at that progress from fall to winter. In this data, we had 3 of our grade levels, 2nd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade exceeded the expected growth that the county gives us. So we are certainly making progress. We are by no means where we want to be, but we believe that the work that we're doing is impacting our students. And this data is not on here because it's new data that we just recently got. All of our EML students take the We to Access assessments each year. And so we've had some real successes that I just would like to share that connects the work that we've done. Last spring, we had 28 students exit from needing ELD services. They exited out of needing ELD services. This spring, that number was 50. So we almost doubled the number of students that, based on their WIDA and access data, did not need the supports from an ELD teacher. And that's great data, and we celebrated that as a staff, we celebrated that with our students, and just recently with our families. But we're not just moving students out of ELD services. We recognize that we certainly do get some newcomers, that's not a realistic expectation to have them exit in just a year. And so we also analyzed our data, and in every single grade level from last year during the spring to this year in the spring, when our students just took this assessment this spring, we reduced the number of students scoring at the level 1 or that lowest range in every single grade level, which means that the students who are at our newcomers and level 1 students are scoring higher. They are progressing to be level 2s and levels 3s. And so again, that's just a real testament to our students, our parents, but really a big shout out to our staff. They do just incredibly hard work, and this was really good kind of celebration for their hard work. Next slide, please. So finally, we're just going to take a minute to go even kind of deeper and just talk about one of our awesome students at Weller Road. We have a third grader who is duly identified. He is a third grader and is an EML level 1. He also is a special education student whose disability code is a specific learning disability. And this student, we have worked very closely with in terms of the classroom teacher, the ELD teacher, and the special ed teacher, supporting that student during collaborative planning. And just as teachers do, they always are having those conversations about how we can best support that student. And just some data for the MAP-M, you saw an earlier slide. That student grew 31 points from fall to winter, which is almost triple what the expected growth would be. And in reading, he grew 15 points, which is about double of what that expected growth would be. And this is just one example of 3 individuals: the classroom teacher, our ELD teacher, our special education teacher, and actually I would say even more than that, because we have a number of staff that work in our classrooms, our intervention teachers, our paraeducators, who really work together to look at the supports that are in the IEP, but also looking at some of those best practices that will help him as an EML learner in terms of sentence frames and anchor charts to give expected growth statements or expected work production, word banks, right? Providing all of those critical skills that we know the students need. Our teachers really spend that time collaborating so that we can really meet the needs of our students. And this little guy, just a great example of the hard work really paying off and supporting our students. So I believe that's it. So thank you very much for hearing a little bit about this important work down at Weller Road.
Well, thank you, Brent.
Oh, and sorry.
Not a problem. I'm here for you. Okay, so thank you and Weller Road for all the work that you're doing with our students. Just again, repeating that we're at 75.42% for LREA right now in this moment. Our current data says that. So we want to maintain that. And I think what we've heard today is the complex work that it requires for us to make sure that special education services for duly identified students is intentional, it's complex, and it requires collaboration, and that's ongoing collaboration. We saw the key points that were recognized in previous slides, and if you could go to the next slide, they're highlighted again. So these evidence-based practices, they really do promote the successful inclusion, and so with that said, what does it require? It requires the professional learning for all of us, for the administrators, for the teachers, for teacher leaders, for general education, ELD teachers, special educators, paraeducators. It also requires the learning of strategies that are appropriate for instruction as well as social emotional behaviors. And then, of course, we move on to the professional learning and the job-embedded coaching that is important for developing a master schedule that encompasses the needs of the students, but also allows for the planning and the collaborative planning amongst the teachers and paraeducators. We know that it also requires the monitoring. And so that monitoring and that coaching comes not only to teachers, but also to administrators so that that cycle of improvement continues. And so, you know, the social emotional success, we also have our social workers and we have our counselors and our school psychologists that support with this overall structure. So with that, I just want to thank everyone this afternoon. I think we've had a very robust discussion. So I turn it back to you, Ms. Yang, to ask us any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Middleton Murphy and Ms. Muscat. And I was at their Weller Road Community Day, and it poured, it rained. I got there like 10 minutes or 15 minutes after the rain. I thought to myself, I'm not going to see anyone, right? It just rained. But whew, people were there. It was wonderful to see staff, students interacting. After school clubs, it's a community school, and community partners there. Tons of students and families. And as we as a system tackle with attendance, tackle with student performance, we really want to look at the school is a place the student feel belong to and the family feel welcome to, right? I think that's going to make a huge difference. And also the academic intervention, if we start early, they feel they're getting something out of the class as they progress in the grades, and that will keep them stay away from the hallway, come into our classroom, right? Engage in that learning. Now, I'm always a fan to see that we have a very short distance between the central office and our school classrooms, right? The shorter the distance, the better. So to have you here, to be able to share with us how you do your planning schedule, how you do your master schedule. And then I'm sure principals have meetings together to share that with your colleagues and exchange ideas. I think that's going to help our students. Now, for your data, the expected growth for page 35 and 36, that's the expected growth for all students. Am I correct? Right, so your data point actually speak volumes. Even with receiving services or having language barriers, the students show really demonstrated great progress, achievement, right? So we are the believer that every student has potential. So thank you for sharing that. But I am, if we can go back to the slide.
Page 25.
Page 25, my colleagues has it memorized, okay. Page 25, it says the total students that's receiving, or if our TV can help us move the slide to page 25, that will help everyone. The students, total students receiving special education in our system is about 20,000 students, right? 19,673. And just now I gave the number that dually identified students is about 6,000. That's a third. That make up a third of our students who receive special education services. And then that's why I feel the Rose Grants work is so necessary, right? In a third of our, EML students is a fifth of our population, but a third in our special education, students who receive special education. So that speaks volume of the need for this work that we are doing with Rose Grant. And I'm going to open up to questions for my colleagues. I'm going to start out this time with Ms. Harris.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. So first question, and as always, we so appreciate having our principals and you know the boots on the ground folks that are living it every day, coming and sharing their work. And so, Mr. Mascot, I'm just wondering, so is Weller Road being represented here because you are just an example of the work that's happening in most of our elementary schools, or because you are an exemplar of how other schools should be doing things? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, I think both. I mean, I think we do really great work, but also I think we meet monthly with our cluster schools, so we also are talking about how this looks and best practices. So this is also reflective of other schools.
And so I do have one of the things that you mentioned very early on in the presentation was when you're looking at a school that is seeking to serve the needs of a diverse community of learners, and you have you're bringing your special education students into the general classroom, and you are looking to see that you have a culture that is supportive of inclusion. And I'm wondering how you monitor and measure that culture that is supportive of inclusion, because I will say this year, I have observed an increased number of parents raising concerns about students in our earliest grades who are, in their minds, causing disruption that is not being well managed and is therefore impacting the experience of their own and other children. And so when that is definitely a school then that is struggling with that support, that culture of inclusion. So again, how are you monitoring and evaluating that culture of inclusion?
So great question. I would say there's a couple of factors or a couple of things that we do. Number one is I think just making sure that for me as a leader and my core team members that are also leaders, that we're visible in the classrooms so that we have a good pulse of what's going on, and talking to teachers and talking to the staff so that very early on, if there are any questions, concerns, that we can sit down and brainstorm, right? And make sure that we are supporting the student, supporting the teacher. So for example, we had a student, a kindergarten student that was new to us that had an IEP. And so we weren't 100% sure of how the student, all of his needs. And so we quickly learned that we needed to kind of reshift some of the support that we were giving that student in terms of our special education team, but also some of our special education paraeducators. So we sat down, we talked together collaboratively, how can we make this work? And so we had to make adjustments, right? And so that's what we do. I think it just comes down to that communication, that collaboration, and then the data. So, our students are making progress. And so I think when people see that, right, and they see not only the data, but just that social emotional piece, right, that classroom kind of environment, that belief that, every student can really benefit the class, I think when you combine all of that, I think it makes that easier, to really make that inclusion happen, especially in maybe some of the cases where it might be more challenging.
I just want to add that what happens there is that the team becomes focused on the student. What are the student's needs? What is this student communicating to us? And what is our data telling us about this student? So sometimes there's often struggle as progress is being made because we're stretching this child as we should every student in the classroom. And so taking a moment to look back at what have we done, what is working, what is not working, and how do we make small shifts so that we are really thinking about the student. Staying focused on the student is the most important part. And so what I heard you say too, and I think this is critical because we do this as supervisors, is that problem of practice. What's going on with this student? What do we notice? And sometimes we're so far in it that we don't see the progress that we've made. So we do need the rest of our team to help us see where has this child gone, what kind of progress have they made, what do we need to do, and what do we need to change.
Yeah, and I appreciated you mentioning that you create opportunities. Parents are such important, families are such important partners in this work, and you make opportunities for parents to come in, and you mentioned special events. One of the issues that I've been hearing from parents lately is the inability to come into their child's school just in the course of a regular school day. Like I think back when some of us had children in elementary school, we were regular volunteers in the classroom. We were there to help with, when it was journal day or, supporting the classroom teacher with Thursday folders and things like that. And what I'm hearing is that those opportunities are just not being offered to parents anymore. And I don't know if that is system-wide, if that is school to school, but that's an invaluable way to build community. And I'm just wondering, Mr. Mascott, at Weller Road, are there opportunities for parents to be part of the school community, not at a special event?
Yeah, so, I could just speak to Weller Road, but, we do have parents that do come in to volunteer. We have one of our pre-K programs. There's a parent that comes in, our pre-K class, a parent comes in to support the classroom teacher. We have had parents come in and be outside as an extra set of hands at lunch and recess. We're a community school, as you know, and so we also 2 days a week and as needed give out food to families in the community. And so we also have parents, a number of parents that come and support that as well. So we definitely do have opportunities. I'd be probably not as many we would like, just because we do have quite a few of working families. But for those, that want to come in, or even just want to come in to, observe and see, just if they have a concern or they've communicated that with me, I'm always welcoming that to happen. But certainly, I agree that it could always be more.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to work on messaging system-wide. Families are important, and they add value to our schools. A question, looking at the data on slides 35 and 36, and I have to say, on slide 35, when you were showing good gains in, grades K to 3 on the MAP-R, I wasn't really surprised because those are our cohorts of students that have really been getting science of reading.
MAP-M, 35 should be M. That's a typo because this is mathematics.
That's all math data, correct?
But same thing, right? I mean, math is not, your reading level is really important.
Absolutely.
And so I was surprised that the Dibbles was kind of flipped on that.
Mm-hmm.
And do we know why?
So one of the things on the Dibbles data that's important to know is that there is a change, like that it's dynamic. It does, the expectations for mastery change each administration. And so they grow. So a student is expected to not only maintain, but also improve. Mm-hmm. So for students who are just learning to read, who also may have a language acquisition, they're just beginning to acquire a second language, and they may have a special education service that is needed, that growth is sometimes trying slower. But I wanted to point out, though, that staying the same is growth also for the individual students.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And the last question from me.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah, Heather.
Ms. Harris, Ms. Yang, Ms. Rivera Oven. My name is Brenda Brown, the Assistant to the Associate Superintendent. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we really have to remember about the Dibbles 8 assessments is that they're timed. And so, as opposed to the MAP-R and the MAP-P and the MAP-M, which are untimed, and assessments with which students who have an EL plan or an IEP can get their read to accommodation so that reading doesn't negatively impact their demonstration of their knowledge, the Dibbles is not like that. We want to see where children are independently. And so that is typically why you would see that flip and that switch.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Useful information.
That's very helpful.
And my last question gets to one of the things that we hear not infrequently from families whose students have IEPs is that my student isn't getting their IEP services. And I think that is an issue, because if you look at the history of IDEA, it's never been fully funded. The implementing legislation apparently was intended to fund, through Title I and other grants, 42% of special education services. I think it actually funds at about 15%. And so, there was a great piece on NPR a couple weeks ago that was really focusing on this issue of how systems are struggling to provide special education services because, frankly, so few individuals are actually going into that work. Teachers, paraeducators, the demand for that profession far exceeds the supply. You know, Victory Lap for us, I mean, they were highlighting a school district in Northern California whose superintendent just had to acknowledge they were not able to, they had to shut down services. They had students who they could not service. They just did not have the people to service them, and rather than put these students in danger every day because they couldn't meet their needs, they were simply not providing services. And I don't think we are at that place, but how are we looking in, when we're coming up with these kinds of, this is highly intensive work that requires people power. So in that landscape where the demand for these para-educators and special educators far exceeds the supply of them, how are we monitoring the level to which we are meeting actually just the IEP, you know, the service that are in our students' IEPs, and when we can't meet them because we know we can't meet them because we do not have the people power to meet them completely, how are we then adapting our practices?
Before you answer that, I want to just make a clarification. You mentioned the 15% funding and 40% funding. I want to say that's federal funding. Federal funding.
Yes.
We still have, that means we put into a bigger chunk of local funding to support our students who receive special education, because federal government never fully funded the services.
Never.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so I think what I heard you say, Ms. Harris, is how do we know that our students are meeting their goals and objectives? So,
well, when, you know, because families are telling us, and they're not wrong, they can show us their IEP, they can show us the services their kids need, they don't match. So we're not actually able to provide the services that the IEP says we will provide. So how are we then adapting our practices when we don't have all the people that we need to provide all those services? So, yeah.
So the first thing that I would just remind everyone is that it's an IEP team that has to provide specially designed instruction. So it doesn't roll solely with a special education teacher. General education teachers are a part of that team, as well as any related service providers. So that's the first part of it. Of course, professional learning continues and is ongoing. And I'm not going to say to you that we haven't struggled with, of course, finding substitutes to be able to provide teachers the ongoing professional learning. So then the central office staff that we also have a specially designed instruction team. Will go into the schools, will work with school teams, and provide some of that job-embedded coaching. The other part of this is, as I indicated, on the IEP, you have the goals and objectives. And so in order to determine that the students have met it, you must provide the data in which we indicate by this time, the students will show measurable progress. And so you're measuring it based on your data points. It's a constant process. If a student is not making the progress that we would anticipate quarterly, then the IEP team has to come back together to talk about what they're going to do differently in order for this child to meet their goals and objectives. It may even be adjusting the goals and objectives. Those are some of the parts of it. The other part is the administrative piece, where we've talked about this, is that you do have to go into the classrooms. You do have to see what does that instruction look like and be able to give teachers feedback about what is happening. The vacancies have certainly impacted us in ways that we could not imagine, but we meet weekly. During the year, it was monthly, but now we're back to weekly meetings with OHRD to continue those recruitment efforts. Additionally, we were having Monday night meetings, virtual meetings, to recruit on current staff members who are in teacher programs. We've also built the opportunities for university partnerships. We're working with our provisionally certified teachers, and we recognize how we have to differentiate our supports. We're looking at how we're going to look at NEO, where we meet with our new educators differently, because they're going to need different types of supports going into the classroom for the first time. Some of them coming out of educational programs, and other people are not coming directly out of educational programs. So they do need to know about de-escalation strategies. They do need to know about how you manage big feelings, because our early learners have big feelings. We have to also remember the impact of the pandemic, not just for the profession, but also for how students are regulating, whether they're general education students or special education students. So all of that becomes important. As long as the offices are collaborating, we're finding that we're able to provide that professional development to all of our staff. We're able to provide that to our staff. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, because I will be looking really closely at our, I know we're losing special educators too. I've heard from many of our classroom special educators who are leaving after the end of this year, and so I'll be looking at those numbers really closely to see how many we are losing, and then what our if we can even maintain replacement rate.
Just to respond to that, I mean, I think you mentioned many things, right? That the law isn't unfunded and or very limited funding, and so we've always had to make up the bulk of it. The other piece is that as a district, initially, programs were the way to provide services for kids, right? And so there are a lot of unique and highly specialized programs throughout the county, but there simply aren't enough to continue that model to be able to meet what we see as changing needs in students. We have many more students in many more schools who are demonstrating the need for supports. Maybe not special education, but definitely needing support in the classroom. And our teachers need support in working with our students who have growing and increasing needs. That is some of the work of really re-envisioning what special education is. The team here has been very intentional about not using the language of a program, because that's the mindset, and that's actually exclusionary, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do here. We really, and what you heard our principal say is, you want to provide the services the student needs in the classroom, because that is that child's best hope of having access to grade level curriculum and being able to accelerate once the needs are actually met. So the shift really is in providing the majority of our staff with the tools and resources and the confidence to work with students that they've never worked with typically before. And so that is part of the ongoing work where we need principal input, where we need to use models that are working, and we need to think about how are we supporting our special education teachers as well, because the teachers are having larger class sizes. The vacancies are causing coverage issues so that we don't have enough people to be in that. And it will just continue to exacerbate itself if we don't have what we have here at Weller Road and in other schools is a team approach to meeting the needs of the students there in the school. We're not an industry that can discard the blueberries that aren't worth high quality. We have to educate all children, and it's our job to make sure we're doing that in each school, and that each school has the resources that they need to do to be able to meet the needs. So we're in sort of a very much acknowledging a transition from a highly specialized, programmatized approach to meeting needs of students to exceeding that. We have more students with more needs, and we have fewer staff in those highly specialized programs. So we have to shift so that our general ed teachers have the support of all of the specialists and the knowledge of the specific language acquisition skills and the specific strategies that you would use to engage learners in the general ed classroom. That's the children's best hope. That's our teachers' best hope. That's our best hope as a county to keep and maintain and retain our teachers. So thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rivera-Alvin.
Just very quickly, because I know we're close to ending our time. I just want to echo Mrs. Harris' point. We are losing a lot of special ed teachers, but we're also getting some new ones. And retention and support needs to be a focus for the newcomers, and I don't know how we're going to do that. But one of the things that when you were talking about your school, and I was thinking, we talk so much about the buy-in of parents, right, into the school system. And I have to say, Lynn, that I hear from parents the barriers that exist that did not exist when my kids were in school. You know, when I was able to just show up at Cedar Grove and, you know, and help with lunch duty and help, you know, in the library and so on. So one of the things I keep hearing from parents is one of the things that it's become a barrier to a lot of them is the fingerprinting. I know that sounds pretty silly, but it's just the cost of the fingerprinting, especially in Title I schools for parents. I know there was a school that they had no volunteers because people could not afford the fingerprinting. Right? So we need to look at some of the systematic things that I think are great for public safety, but that I think are also creating some barriers, especially for our most needed schools and our parents, because we do want them involved. So that's one of my questions was, is there, I know you bring the parents together, you have, you know, community nights, but I want to go more to the individualization of students and that parent engagement with the students. And some parents are probably going to need a little bit more engagement than others, right? Because they're either newcomers, this is a foreign thought to them. There's a lot of cultural assumptions about your child being special education or your child having special needs, correct? So there is going to be that a little bit of a resentment sometimes. And how then do you, as part of this, do you create an individual plan for those kids who are going to need maybe even a weekly call, bringing them in, to meetings, encourage them to be participating. For me, this is vital, because if you don't have the buy-in of the parents, we're always going to be swimming against stream. We need to make sure that our parents are on board. And that cultural component is so vital, because you might have a school in Wheaton, or you might have a school, where you have different components, especially if we're talking about the Latino community, we're not monolithic, right? So you might have a school that you have a large Salvadorian community, and those interpreters then should kind of match that kind of, that kind of language, right? So they understand, versus a school in Up County where you're gonna have more of a South American community, right? That the terms might be different. So I just kind of want to know how you navigate that.
Right. So two things I'll two things that I'll say for that. One of the things that we do is we have every school has a student well-being team that we look at students and who maybe there's attendance concerns, maybe there's just some social emotional concerns. And so what we do is we meet every week, our well-being team. Last year we met every week, but just to your point, we realized that we probably could have been doing a better job in connecting more with families to share what we're seeing, to get their voice, to hear from them. They know their parents, or they know their students best. So this year what we added was we meet 3 times a month now instead of 4, and that 4th meeting, we set up meetings with parents to bring them in so that we can problem solve with them. So we have our counselors, our psychologists, we're there talking to them as, hey, let's work on this together. So that's one example. And then the second thing, we actually just talked about this at our core team meeting the other day, and we're going to be spending some time this summer, is how can we really look at our back to school night to make it more meaningful and purposeful for our families, right? Like, how can we create that space where it is, to your point, a little bit more specific, individualized? Because we don't want to just continue to doing the same model for back to school night that we've always done. That's been a big push from the county too, is really asking us to reimagine that. And so that's going to be work that we do over the summer. We've already talked with our community school liaison about getting some voice data from parents to ask them, what would you like that to look like? So I think it just really comes down to asking questions and just listening, right? Just listening to what our parents need. So that's something that we're going to be definitely doing this summer as we move to next school year.
All right. So thank you, Ms. Muscat, for that comment. So in terms of family engagement, right, when we talk about engagement, there are 4 different levels. You have informing, then you involve, you consult, then you collaborate, right? We can't say sending out survey data that we have done community engagement. So I really appreciate you saying that your 4th meeting is inviting family in to do problem solving. That is collaboration, right? So thank you for that. And I want to thank all the staff, and I also know that our ELD department have multiple people, Ms. Harrod and several staff in the audience. So thank you so much for coming. We have a very robust conversation about training, about working with families, about really practicing at the school level what we would like to see happening to our students. So if there's no other comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.